Those of you who weren't there or don't remember, May 16th, last 2 weeks ago, the Jackson County Regional Health Center had a great open house at our wonderful hospital, and they celebrated the 75th anniversary of a public hospital in Jackson County. And because they've only been out there for 4 or 5 years, that was a whole nother 70 years that they needed to talk about that wasn't there. So the Historical Society, we were really honored that they asked us to come and set up some exhibits of some of the older things in medicine for people to look at the end of their tour. And so we were happy to do that. And I have to thank all the help for that. Dixie Brinkman and Marcella Bermal and Marcella Henneke were awesome. And it just turned out very well. For those of you who were there, and I see a few of you that were there that day, I'm sorry if you're listening to this again. But, you know, hang in there. And please, if you have comments along the way, please be sure to just raise your hand and give us your thoughts, because that's kind of what Brown Bag Lunch is for. So, much of the information and things that we talk about and the things that we have at the medical part of our exhibits at the other museum center around Dr. Frank. He's a member of our Hall of Fame, and he's just a doctor that we have the most things about, so naturally he's the one that we're talking about. Dr. Frank, for those of you who don't know, was chief of staff at the hospital for 20 years. That's a really long time. And I'm sure from the comments I heard today, everybody knows that he was considered the baby doctor. And so we're going to be talking about him, and if you have comments or memories about him, please add those in as well. Okay. So like many of you, and I know many of you did, knew Dr. Franks, I knew Dr. Franks. He brought me into this world in a very cold January, Leroy Hospital. And at that time, my folks lived over where Briggs parking lot is now. And I'm told that my dad had to shuttle almost all the way from Briggs over to Leroy Hospital and drove me there in the old Morning Glory bakery truck, because that's all we had back in those days. And somewhere I had a picture. I looked and looked for it so you could see that picture, but I couldn't find it. So that's my little Dr. Frank story. Best Dr. Frank story ever, I have to tell you, took place when it was 17 degrees below zero in Maquoketa, Iowa, in Jackson County, just after another Iowa snowstorm, and he and his nurse made their way to a drafty farmhouse where Dr. Frank delivered 2 twin girls. One weighed 2 3/4 pounds, and her sister weighed 2.5 pounds. And he very carefully placed them each in a shoebox, and he put them in the cook stove to keep them warm because it was so very cold in the house. And so I think that if it hadn't been for Dr. Frank, our friend Marcella Bermal would probably not have been here today. So we thank her. Okay, so please do. She deserves a lot of credit. Best Dr. Frank story ever. So this is a photograph that's been special to me, I guess. It was taken from an old tattered photograph that was found among Dr. Frank's things. He's known as the baby doctor, and this was taken, this was a copy from the newspaper that ran the photograph. It shows Dr. Frank with 8 newborns, and it states that they were born within 36 hours of each other in 1942. That's what the newspaper said. Now I know that that can't be right, because these were my classmates. And, and in fact, I had to look to see if I was in there, but I wasn't. Yvonne Sutton, I know, one of my very best friends, was born November 4th of 1941. And all of these people were born in 1941, so that's one of the mistakes. And it must be that they were just all in Leroy Hospital at the same time, because the 36 hours can't make that turn out. But if you can't read it, it was said in the newspaper that at that time, and that was, you know, mid-career for him, he had delivered enough babies to equal the population of DeWitt at that time. That's a lot of babies. So in the picture, our left to right are Gary Lee Jurgensen on the 5th of November, Melvin Merrick on the 3rd, Judith Heaster on the 3rd, Yvonne Sutton on the 4th, Terry Squisith on the 7th, it said, Jim Owen, after Dr. Frank Winship on the 3rd of November, and Judith Wasaba, and the last one was Thomas Birkin. And so again, it's hard to see how all this fit into 36 hours, but that's what the picture and everything says. So another a really special thing that's near and dear to my heart, and evidently many others, is this wonderful ledger. It's a ledger that was kept by Dr. Franks. And here it is. And it's really tattered and very, very precious. And so I copied for you a page just so you could kind of see. So when we're done, I'm going to take this back to Marcella Bermal, and she'll be happy to look up for you. Anybody you want to look up in this book. A lot of us have found ourselves in that book, and so it was kind of neat. The book dates from 1919 until 1945. And on this particular page, I found a lot of people I knew: Loris McLaughlin, Jim Littlefield Breeden, and I thought that was interesting because when we found the Littlefield tombstone that got returned to here, Jim Breeden was here. Didn't know then that his middle name was Littlefield. Dwayne Hansen, Wayne Mayberry is on this page, and Joy Struble Eads is on this page. So Dr. Frank delivered over 3,000 babies, and that included 25 sets of twins. So if we talk just a little bit about Doc Franks himself, he was born in Maquoketa in 1894 to William and Anna Paulson Frank. And William Frank, his dad, was a cabinet maker. But he didn't find very much work here when he came here, so he became a wagon maker. He was a wagon maker by trade, and they were what Dr. Franks kept referring to as moderately poor. William's brother was a blacksmith, so I think J. Frank and J.J. Frank, blacksmiths that we kind of know about, that were kind of across from where Stockham is on Platt and Auto Street. Right in there is where his blacksmith shop was. But in all of this, William took in a boarder. They needed extra money, so he took in a boarder. And it was the son of a physician, and that boy roomed with them for quite a time when Dr. Frank was growing up. And Dr. Frank said that's what triggered his interest in becoming a doctor, was knowing this young man. I'm just going to show you quickly some pictures that were important to Dr. Frank, because he was very, very athletic. He was on the first football team for the first 2 years that Maquoketa even had a football team. His family had lived in Savannah for 7 years as his dad looked for work when he was 7 to 14. And when he lived in Savannah, Illinois, his best friend was Wayne King. So Dr. Frank became a great doctor, and Wayne King became a great musician. He returned to school here when he was 14. He played baseball, and at 160 pounds, he played on this first football team that Maquoketa had in 1910. And this picture, I think, was 1911, the second team. But he liked to tell stories about this team, and he always talked about how the only thing the school furnished, the public school furnished, was the football. And the mothers of the players had to sew padding in sweaters that the boys bought for 49 cents at the dry goods store. And the mothers had to pad them up. And the cobblers, they took their shoes to the cobblers, and the cobbler put cleats in their shoes. They didn't have any kind of uniform or anything. So he liked to talk about that. He said that he was never interested in basketball. He never played basketball, but his first love was baseball. And so here are just a couple of photos of him. I put arrows there, so hopefully you can find him in his days at Maquoketa High School on the baseball team. That one, and then this one. There he is right there. Again, his first love was baseball. So he graduated from Maquoketa High School. He was the president of his class in 1912. And he was just kind of one of the most beloved people in the whole high school because of his personality and all of his talents and his brilliance. And then he said again how limited his family was with money. So he graduated and then he worked for a year before he went to the University of Iowa. And during his years at the university, he had to work all the time to finance his education. And he had a variety of jobs. His favorite was a waiter because then he knew he was probably going to get something to eat. He was a janitor and he sold tickets. He was a ticket taker at the university athletic events. So he worked very, very hard. He was a natural athlete, and he played on the university's baseball team from 1916 to 1919. And again, he was the team captain. And he did all this while being a junior in medical school and working all these different jobs to keep himself afloat. So this is a picture of his wedding day. He talks about how he skipped breakfast for an entire year. And this enabled him to save $50 so that he could buy an engagement ring for his sweetheart. And during spring break in 1918, he married Florence Johnson, also from Maquoketa. And he also said to commemorate the event, they drove from, now automobiles were new back then, right? Not everybody had an automobile. To commemorate the event, they drove from Maquoketa to Elwood and back with her mother in the back seat. But they had a really happy marriage. They had 4 children. On some tapes that you'll hear about, he talks about his 2 sons who did not make it, did not survive their birth, and 2 girls. Phyllis Smith, who some of you probably knew. Phyllis was his nurse for many years, I think. She was his nurse when I knew him. And then Genevieve Brooks. Husband was Dale Brooks, and they also lived in Maquoketa. Those were his 2 girls. And this is oops, get that all in there, sorry. This is a photograph of Florence and Dr. Frank, as you can see, with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. William Frank, and never have I found her first name. So his mother's first name. But it's just interesting, every time Dr. Frank talked about his parents, he always said, and I made up my mind not to depend upon my hands to make a living. And I think that that was a reference to how hard he saw his father work for so little. And so he decided he was not going to struggle, he and his family were not going to struggle the way they had to struggle just to survive. But you can tell that he did use his hands to make a living, right? From the day he started to practice medicine, he used his hands to heal the sick and deliver over 3,000 babies, like we said. One thing about his hands that's kind of sad, and I noticed that he never mentioned it in these tapes, where we got a lot of this information, so maybe it happened afterwards. But before the hospitals came, doctors that could afford it had x-ray equipment in their offices, and they did their own x-rays. And they wore heavy, heavy leaded gloves to protect themselves when they did these x-rays. Well, Dr. Frank's gloves began to wear out, and he was busy, and he just never found time to order new ones. And as a result, the x-ray burns cost him the loss of 1 finger and partial loss of 3 others. But he continued to practice medicine. So I just find that a very sad thing. In our collection of artifacts of Dr. Frank's, we have some of his stationery. But to go back, in 1919, he graduated from the University of Iowa School of Medicine. And then he did something that probably was very challenging for him. He turned down an internship at Mount Sinai Hospital in Cleveland that he had been awarded. And he came back to Iowa, back to Maquoketa, and he went immediately into practice with his father-in-law, Dr. F.V. Johnson, again here in Maquoketa. He came back because physicians were needed so badly then to combat the flu. And they were partners for 20 years, he and Dr. Johnson, his father-in-law, until Dr. Johnson passed away. During his 57 years in general practice, Dr. Frank says that he had 4 different offices. The one I remember is this one on 109th Main Street, where he was for 30 years. I don't know if anybody remembers where any of his other offices might have been. They were quite a while ago. Maybe some of them were even in his father-in-law's house. We just kind of don't know that, but we would like to know if anybody knows. And then he would also talk about Saturday nights. And as you know, Saturday nights in Maquoketa, Saturday nights in Maquoketa were really something very special. And his office and other doctors' offices on Friday nights would be open until midnight, because patients would arrive in 2 shifts. Back then, all the farmers came to town on Friday nights. And they came early and they took their grocery lists to the little general stores around, the little grocery stores around Maquoketa. They left their list and then they went to the movies. And then when they got out of the movies, they went back to the grocery store and they picked up their groceries, etc. Well, there were 2 movies, and so his patients would arrive in 2 shifts. The early movie and the late movie after that. And so he always worked until after midnight on those nights, and that just seems incredible to me. But that's the way it was. He talks a lot about before the Jackson County Hospital was built, and he talked about, oh, I think I have these in the wrong order. Hang on, sorry. I just mixed everything up. Yeah. He talked about when the Jackson County Hospital was built and how all of the doctors, not just him, traveled. There were 2 years when there was no hospital in Maquoketa. And during that time, these doctors traveled between Davenport and Dubuque and Clinton, treating their patients. If they couldn't get someone to deliver a baby, all maternity cases had to go to one of these places. If they could get another doctor there to do that, that was fine. If they could get another doctor there to do their surgeries, they did. But when they couldn't, Dr. Franks talks about sometimes making 3 trips a day to Clinton and back, because he had patients that were in critical condition that he had to be there to take care of. I just put in quickly some photographs that we have in our collection, and most of them came from Dr. Frank, and they're kind of self-explanatory. We know that in February of 1953, Dr. Frank was elected president of the Jackson County Medical Assignment Society, and there he is at the head of the table at one of their meetings, and he talks about a lot about the other doctors that were here practicing medicine in Maquoketa at that time. In 1969, the hospital held an open house in his honor, and over 3,000 people attended. I always wondered if they were the parents of the 3,000 babies. I don't know. But supposedly 3,000 people attended, and this was held in the German wing of the Jackson County Public Hospital. And here is another, you know, when we were at the open house at the hospital, which was so wonderful, I did learn the names of a couple of these people where there are question marks, and I wrote them down diligently, but I can't find it. So if anybody who knows who a couple of these ladies are in particular that we don't know, we would love to have this, we'd love to have that information. And just another picture of the medical doctors in Maquoketa. And you can see there, for those of you who can't see it, standing in the back from left to right is Dr. John Broman, Dr. Clay Risser, then we don't know who this is, Dr. Pekosh from Lost Nation, Dr. Andrew, Earl Andrew, Dr. Fred Swift Jr., that must be him, and Dr. Jordan. And then seated are Dr. Fred Swift Sr. and Dr. Frank. And it says unknown doctor from Preston, but that must be Dr. Cahill. Does anybody?
No.
You don't think so? Okay.
What year was it?
You know, I don't think we know that. Oh, it was in the 60s. We don't know the exact year.
He would have been at
Okay, so we need to find out this man's name. We don't know his name. And then getting ready for the open house that we were just talking about, where 3,000 people attended. As busy as he was, they insisted that Dr. Frank come over to the newspaper office and look at the previews of things that they were going to put in the paper about this open house. So there you see him. They finally got him over there, pulled him away from his patients, and he was reviewing things. And then this was some of the things that were in the paper about the open house. And it was interesting to me that below this, right here, on the rest of the page, on the rest of the page was this picture. And they said that even though this picture was taken in 1954, they put this in the paper in 1976 because they thought that it most represented who Dr. Frank was. And I just thought that was neat. Not only that, those are my two first cousins, Phyllis and Dee. So that was just a special picture that's always been in our family. They grew up in Emmeline at the Emmeline General Store. And then again, at the open house itself, we see Dr. Frank and his wife Florence getting older, as we all are. And also at the open house, these are his two daughters. I think this is Phyllis, right? Phyllis?
Genevieve.
And this is Genevieve.
Yes.
Right? Okay. And this is pictures of some of the babies that he delivered. So I just thought that was a really wonderful early photo. So that's his family at the open house. And then part of what maybe a lot of people don't know about Dr. Frank, I sure you didn't, was that for many years he played Santa Claus. Does anybody remember that? Any of you hospital people, do you? Did he come to your house? No, he didn't come to your house.
Did mine.
He came to Helen Mitchell's house.
I had to sing, I'm a little teapot. I had to learn that.
When he came.
I can't sing.
Okay, thank you.
My husband told me he came to his parents' place at the South End, and they asked Dr. Frank's Santa Claus to go upstairs and say hi to him and his sister. Well, my husband told me this morning, that when he went up there, my husband said right away, "Well, hi, Dr. Franks." He knew who he was. So he didn't surprise him.
Well, they said this was one of the, thank you, this was one of the best Santa Claus uniforms, outfits anywhere. So that's surprising because it doesn't look like it to me. But that's really good. Okay, so I think that's my last photograph. But you know, just to kind of sum up, when he retired in January of 1976, that's when he retired. After 57 years in medicine, the reason he gave for the fact that he was retiring was the mountains of required paperwork demanded by the government and what he called the socialization of medicine, saying that, and these are his words, the profession just didn't have the personal relationship that it used to have. And that's what he enjoyed about being a doctor, was that personal relationship. He made no secret of the fact that he hated Medicare, saying that patients were no longer people, but instead they were the case in room number 615. And he felt that government interference had destroyed the doctor-patient relationship completely. He foresaw the coming of an era of government distribution of practices, where he thought that eventually it would come to the point where the government would tell doctors where they had to go to practice because that's where a certain doctor was needed or something like that. He just thought all those things were going to happen, and on the tapes that we have, he talks about that a lot. But what a wonderful man. So I'd just like everybody to know, and whether I can play this for you or not is another story. I'll do my best. But we do have Dr. Franks' story in his own words. And to celebrate the bicentennial anniversary of our country, so 200 years of our country, right? 250 years is coming up. The Lawrence Van Hook chapter of the DAR decided to interview prominent people in the county and record history from 1900 to 1976 when they started. Of course, anyway. And they did this because they wanted people to be able to tell their story in their own words and for people to hear it in their own voices. And to give, and then they gave copies to the Historical Society and to each of the schools in the county. I remember seeing a lot of those. I remember that there was an interview we recorded with Pierce Mitchell, right? That's the one I gave you to look at, that she still has. She'll be doing a brown bag lunch on that one of these days. There were 2 tapes done by Ben Jacobson, who was certainly an interesting person in the history of Maquoketa, longtime mayor, chief of the fire department forever, and then his business, Ringlup's Hardware. But on July 18th of 1873, Wilma Harder and Marjorie Clemens interviewed Dr. Frank at his house, and he lived at 810 Niles Street in Maquoketa. That's a very special address because after he lived there, Pastor Schrader and his family lived there, and I just thought that was really neat. So some of the things that he talked about on this tape, and I wish every one of you would come in and listen to this tape. I did learn the other day from our librarians upstairs that these little white cassette tapes that look like this are only made to last 4 years. These are old. One of them sounds really good, or a couple of them sound really good, but reminds me that this is the time that we need to have these tapes copied before we don't have them anymore. And right after Helen gets her brown bag lunch about her father, we'll have that one done. We'll have that one done as well. But he talked about his whole life, and he talked about fascinating things, and it was fun because he talked about going to an old farmhouse once, and he said, can you believe what it would be like when you go to a farmhouse, the mother is in bed, and you deliver the mother in the bed. And he talks about how that was done, and he said, could you imagine what it would be like, what it was like, to deliver a baby from a mother who's in a feather bed? Oh. Think of that. He said it's like digging a gopher out of a hole. So these days are awesome. So I'm gonna do my best. And if I can't find what I hope to play for you, we'll just hear whatever he's saying at the time. Okay. Now it's too dark up here and I can't see. Okay, we hope this works.
Then you did travel mostly by horse?
Oh, definitely so.
And
The automobiles at that time were propped up on blocks for the winter. But few automobiles there were. And then we had Dr. Johnson with my father and I ran 3 teams from the local livery stable.
you remember the names of any of your drivers?
Lokex was one. Masnadi was another. There's another one that drove a lot, and I've forgotten who he was.
Was it usually young boys that got to drive for you, or
No. They were middle-aged men.
they were employed by the livery stable?
Yes, ma'am.
Whose livery stable?
Jackson's livery stable was a main one in town, and Brothers had another. And the third, and I don't know what's the name of it.
Did you make house calls just routinely all the time, or was that just for cases like flu and major illness?
No, for me, it was Jimmy. I was called at $2 a call.
$2.
The mileage in the country was 50 cents a mile one way, and $2 for the call. Then we paid every trip out of that. Maybe what
idea how many babies you've delivered over the years?
Somewhat over 3,000.
Have you always been in general practice?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
So I'm going to try, if anybody wants to talk about some of the things that they remember about the hospital, like maybe Gloria Jorgensen, who's here, who's on the hospital board, anything you'd like to say really quick while I try to find this other thing I'm looking for? She didn't know I was going to ask her to do this, so. Can you think of anything?
Bonnie?
Okay.
I just wanted to comment. My husband, he got his middle name from Dr. Owen Frank. And I understand a friend of his also has the middle name as Owen. And that's, my husband remembers that the
Okay,
most.
tell everybody who your husband is.
It's Richard Owen Miller, and we live in Baldwin. And his parents were Curly and Vivian Miller, who had the South End restaurant. And my husband did tell me in 1949, when his parents bought the South End from Alice Winokur, who is Doug Winokur's mom,
Okay.
they went to Dr. Frank's and borrowed the money from him. So he was a very generous man to help people out. And they made the restaurant very popular.
Very popular. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Did you have a comment?
Yes, I was born in 1939. My name is Richard Owen Wild.
Richard Owen Wild. Glad you came today.
And I have one other addition. I don't know if this is the right time or not.
Sure.
But I was also born in Leroy Hospital. And the main operating room, Dr. Franks had to carry my mother across the aisle and put her in the bed at that time.
In the bed. That's awesome.
Because
There's,
they weren't allowed to have wheeled carts and stuff like that.
is that right? Wow. He tells, oh, go ahead.
Could anyone tell me about this Leroy Hospital?
Okay, so before there was a public hospital in Maquoketa, there were several private hospitals through the years. And the first Leroy Hospital was on South Main Street, just up a couple houses from Dr. Riggs's hospital on the corner. And it was like 223 or something, I can't remember the exact, but that house. 310?
I'm 312, it's right next door.
Okay, thank you for that. That was the first Leroy Hospital. Then they got too busy and that big house wasn't enough. So then they rented Dr. Ristine. So, Dr. Ristine, they rented a house from a doctor who had just retired. That's right behind, so you know where Goodwill is now, in the Goodwill parking lot. Right behind that on 2nd Street. Got that address in your head? Oh, darn. It's the one with a tall thing on top, and it was green, but I think it's white now. Then that became Leroy Hospital, and that's where a lot of these babies were born. Like, I was born in 42, and so at least by then, it was that hospital where all of these babies were
Why was
being
it called
born.
Leroy?
It was named after, it was the first name of the husband of the nurse who started the hospital.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Roger?
Remember a couple things. One was in 1949, Dr. Frank came and gave a pep talk to our football team. I
Oh,
remember it
really?
pretty well. Second thing I'll mention is that house on Main Street was owned by our family for a while.
That's right. I knew that.
Yep.
By Roger Stewart's house. By Roger Stewart's family.
My tonsils were taken out in that building.
In that building. Wow. Any other comments? If not, I'll see if I did this right. So this tape player that we have, because you know we have such sophisticated equipment here at the Historical Society, I have 2 old tape players that I dug out of the KMAQ radio station basement when the radio station was sold. So that along with my lack of skills, but we're going to hope that we can hear this next excerpt. Okay. Uh-oh. So I don't know why it's not loud anymore. I don't know why it's not. But you can't do that, right?
And he had diverted interest. At one time, he was going to be very good.
Okay, he's talking about Dr. Ritter.
Another time, he promoted the Florida land sales, and so a long time until they found most of the sales were the land they owned was underwater. And then he went in for hormones. He had a herd of goats. And he really had something, but he was too soon with it. I wondered that. He was too soon. He recognized the hormones like to do. He used it for high blood pressure, he used it for sterility, he used it for gastric ulcers, he used it for everything. But his method of production, he castrates goats. And he used a testicle, he squeezed the testicle in a lemon squeezer, and the juice would really infiltrate the tape. He injected. Well, needless to say, it wasn't aseptic. And we opened abscess after abscess after his injection. But he tried to sell his theory and his, I know to some of the larger companies, including Lillian Park Haven, but they didn't think enough of it to send anybody here for them got to get it, so it was just lost in the shuffle. But about 4 or 5 years later, the hormones started to put months to market.
Well, so I don't know if you could hear that, but Dr. Ritter, we know quite a bit about because he was one of Asher Schrader's favorite doctors that he liked to talk about. And he was a brilliant doctor. I don't know, he graduated cum laude from a huge medical school. He was very, very bright. We had a Brabant lunch about him, and we talked about how he raised ginseng up on 2nd Street somewhere. You know, the herb, the root, ginseng? Ginseng. Okay, I said that wrong. Okay, thank you. He had all these different schemes. But one thing he did, which Dr. Franks was saying was way ahead of his time, was he recognized that hormones were going to play a great part in medicine going forward. Not yet, but going forward. So he was taking hormones from his herd of goats and injecting them in people, but it wasn't necessarily germ-free. And so their injections would become infected, and then they'd go to a different doctor and they would have to clean the abscess injection, wherever it was. But Dr. Frank recognized that in 4 or 5 years, hormones did become really popular. And Dr. Ritter had been able to interest one of the big drug companies to come here and listen to his theory and see what he was doing, he would have really been a famous person. But he couldn't get anybody to come and listen to him at that point. So that's why he was saying that he was ahead of his time. But he was on the right track, somehow. Okay, we have one more, hopefully. Hopefully I've got this one in the right place. When we were talking about, Richard was talking about carrying his mother across the hall, Dr. Frank. He tells another fun story about how he was at a farmhouse delivering a baby, and I think his name was Owen Schmidt that he talks about, delivering this baby. And his mother was a large woman, and she got called to the farmhouse, and she was in bed, and her husband was holding one knee, and her mother was holding the other knee, and the bed broke.
Oh.
And so they had to pick her up. Here she is in labor. They have to pick her up and carry her to another room and put her in a different bed to deliver the baby. So he just has lots of funny stories like that. And one of them, he's talking about, I'm not sure just which hospital, but probably it was the hospital that I remember as Briarwood that was up here, just right at the top of Park Street. And there were stairs from the operating room, maybe going upstairs. And so after the surgery, they would have to carry the patient up these stairs to put the patient in a room. And again, a very large patient. And as he was trying to help carry this patient up, he had his surgical pants on, and he began to lose his trousers. And he was trying to carry this heavy woman in, and he said he was really in a pickle because he was. But it's very funny to hear him tell these stories. There's 4 sides of 2 tapes, and they're so worth listening to. But let's see if we can listen to one more. If I did this right.
Our first hospital, when I came here, was a 3-room, like, one of the local nurses had the or anesthetist lives in the house, and 3 rooms were run by a registered nurse, an old-time registered nurse. 3 rooms in an operating room. And one of my first cases up there was helping giving an anesthetic for delivery for my father-in-law, and Dr. Carson was a brief delivery, and they wrote that Charles Reagan delivering the baby. Then turned the baby over to me for setting. I set the leg and rested the cigar box. It's broken up in splints. And the boy is 55 years old now. He's a contractor in Minneapolis. No, got along. And at the same hospital, I was giving an anesthetic for Dr. R.D. Carson when he had his stroke. He had his stroke right at the operating table. And then we had the City Memorial Hospital, which is run by 2 RNs. The operating room was on the ground floor. There were 4 rooms upstairs and 3 rooms down.
That was at the top of the hill.
And after surgery, we'd have to carry the surgical case up this flight of steps, which I think probably constituted 40 steps, pretty deep. One incident, and I got about halfway up, and my operating bed started to drop. I was awful shit.
Sorry, I didn't mean to ruin that story.
Those little incidents stand out, but you know.
Yes, I do. I'm sure you remember it. You can't,
Then in our hospital was turned down at least 2 or 3 times before we got the bonds passed to carry it over in 1950. And we worked hard and donated heavy to doctors. 2 of us had x-ray machines, and we threw those in. So all of us would go to the hospital, and without any braggadocio, just opening my shoulders, I was elected chief of staff and was chief of staff for 20 years at the local hospital.
That's really a wonderful record.
And, well, I can say 20 years was 2 years that I wasn't, because they put another man in and re-elected me again. So it's maybe
Wasn't there quite a few years just prior to the opening of this hospital that
we had none.
you did a lot?
We had no hospital, and we had to transport all of our OB work and our surgical work to Clinton, transport every year.
Because I remember our first son was born in Clinton, and then 3 years later, Larry was born in Paris.
Dr. Clayton, that's what did most of my surgery that time. I remember very distinctly, I had an OB who had a percentage. Is that registered? Well, I started after her slides ahead of the baby, see, so that the mother starts bleeding. New baby, the mother, and everything in a short time. Well, I remember writing up the percentage and called up Davenport. Dr. Schaefer told him what happened was bringing her right down. And we went from Lost Nation to Davenport, St. Louis and Davenport. I don't know what time it was, a short time. It went shooting out every time hardly speak. And 15 minutes after I got there, we delivered the baby right up. She was already at the crew all set, with the table ready. She was on the table, and just 15 minutes later, we had the baby. He said we wouldn't have a life until we did. And but that's what we had to go through for something. It was very, I don't mind telling you. I told one of the local boys who was doing a lot of obstetrics, he'd never be a specialist until he could deliver a woman in a feather bed. And that's probably good. I have one.
I guess, my feather bed didn't break like bed did.
Well, I didn't go
When you had so few rooms at the local hospital, when you had the small one, how in the world did you decide who would get the use of the hospital room?
we weren't bothered too much. The attitude of the lady at that time was the hospital was a place of last resort. They didn't expect to come back when they went in. That was the attitude that we had to fight. Still to this day, we do have to have it.
That's probably mostly amongst the elderly.
That's right. But that was the attitude of the practically all ladies at the time, that they didn't expect to come back. They were serious enough to go to the hospital. They didn't expect to.
Sorry, I spoiled two of his stories because I didn't think I was going to get there, I guess. Anyway, they're interesting tapes, and thank goodness that the DAR did those interviews when they did. And like I said, we'll be waiting for Helen Rockwood's from Bangladesh about the work that they did about her father. Anyway, they're wonderful. Does anyone else, before we close, have anything that they want to add about any of the doctors at that time? Wow, or the nurses for that matter.
When I worked there in 72, and at the emergency room Central Supply. And
Okay.
so Phyllis Moorhead catered to Dr. Frank all the time. He'd come there in the morning, and she had to light his cigar and sit there and go through files and stuff like that first.
Okay.
And then we would, and what was so interesting too was his gloves.
Yes.
His gloves, I wish we would have kept some, so you saw the ones that he threw away, but they were all gloves that fit his hand because of the fingers missing, and so like this too. It was really.
So he continued to do
Yes,
x-rays even after he lost a finger and part of
Well,
his
no, he
nose?
continued to make, suture up people or use
okay.
the gloves, the surgical.
Not the radiation
No,
gloves?
the surgical gloves, the
Okay.
rubber gloves. So they were probably disintegrated after a time.
Probably.
But yeah, it was always interesting that we always catered to him when he came in. It was like, oh, here comes Dr. Frank.
Okay. Because the hospital was his baby, you didn't say that.
Yeah.
Anything else?
My husband did tell me he remembers when he came home from the service in September of 1965, he had sinus infection. He went to Dr. Frank's, and yes, it was $2, and Dr. Frank's gave him some pills. So that's, that was a pretty good deal compared to nowadays.
That's for sure.
For an office visit.
That's
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, that surprised me.
He talks often about how little money he ever made because so many people didn't or couldn't pay their bills, and he never pursued them. He never hired a collector or to dog them down or anything like that. It just, it just went away. So as was said, he was a very generous man.
What age was Dr. Frank when he passed away?
You know what, I don't think I wrote that down. I think I should have. I know it was 9 years after his wife died. I think I'm missing a page here somewhere. I think I only have. I'm sorry, I do not know. I know they did these in 1973, they did the recordings, but I don't know when he died. Does anybody have an idea? I don't know. Richard, you had a comment?
I had a couple. One I was going to mention was that back to his athletic years,
Right.
I believe, myself included, every boy, he must have convinced the mothers that their sons should play football and they wouldn't get hurt. And his daughter, I can't think of her name right now, but
There was Phyllis and Genevieve, right?
Phyllis, yeah.
That was his parents.
Her and her husband, Smith, went coast to coast. And they had a
Yes.
fire there one night. I don't know what year that was, but
Yes.
that was a place to go, hardware store to go to at that time.
Right. What was his name? Gordon Smith. Gordon Smith.
Gordon,
And then
right.
Genevieve was married to Dale Brooks, I remember. They donated a lot of Dr. Frank's things to the museum, and I remember one day they came and got me, and I went to their house to see what they had that we might want. And she had made a white hickory nut cake. And I can still remember how good that white hickory nut cake was. Barb? Oh, okay.
Where was the last house that Dr. Frank lived in? Was it in here on Maplesport?
I think it would have been 810 Nile Street where Asher Schrader lived later. I would think so.
I just.
Yeah, I think so.
remember the abstract when my mom bought the house up on Angus, and I thought it was built by.
Okay, and maybe that's just something that we don't know.
I just wanted to mention that his athletic prowess continued through his family, because his grandson,
Oh.
Richie Smith, was quarterback of the Maquoketa football team. I don't know when that was, in the 80s maybe. So he passed that on. His grandson was the quarterback.
Was a quarterback. Oh, thank you. All right. Well, I hope at some point you have a chance to listen to the whole tape because it's really entertaining. He was very witty, and the experiences that he had through his years of medicine are just unbelievable. Things you just couldn't imagine. Like I said, he has a lot of interesting stories. So thank you very much, and hope to see you again next week. And don't forget, the little book will be here with Marcella if you want to see if anybody's in there that you don't know.
I did want to say, I just Googled on my phone, when did Dr. Owen Frank die? His middle initial was L.
Yes.
Okay, well this is an M in there, so that's not the one. I'll have to.
Okay. I'm sorry. I think I did write that down, but I think I only seen a paper. It's not on my